Good evening. This is the I-24 News Evening Edition. I'm Lucy Arish, and these are the headlines. In Vienna, Iran and the six world powers begin formal talks aimed at a comprehensive agreement to limit Iran's controversial nuclear program. Ukraine is in flames once again. At least 5 people dead after violent clashes erupt between opposition protesters and police in central Kiev. And I-24 News sits down with the first gay couple recognized by the State of Israel as legal parents through surrogacy without the process of adoption. Good evening again. The pursuit of an Iran nuclear deal entered a new level today as 6 world powers and Iran launched the first round of high-level talks on a comprehensive deal in Vienna. Though Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Khamenei himself stated the talks will lead nowhere, delegates emphasized they are determined to reach a deal. I-24 News diplomatic correspondent Tal Shalev sums up the first day of talks.
As talks between 6 world powers and Iran resumed this morning at the UN headquarters in Vienna, both sides agree on at least one thing. Reaching a comprehensive deal on the controversial nuclear program will be difficult, if not impossible. Nevertheless, the official launch of the talks, scheduled to last 3 days, was positive and smiley.
I think it's fair to say that there's a good atmosphere. There's always been a very good working relationship between High Representative Ashton and Minister Zarif, and that's continued.
We just had a very good beginning, that was all.
The Iranian foreign minister and the EU foreign policy chief both met last night for an informal dinner and continued discussions today in plenary meetings attended by political directors from the P5+1, the United States, China, Russia, Britain, France, and Germany. On the sidelines of the summit, the Iranian delegation also held a series of bilateral talks with the world powers. This week's discussions will be dedicated mainly to the procedural details of the talks, which are scheduled to last 6 months. Only later on will the sticking points come up. The West wants to ensure it can detect any breakout towards a bomb and is demanding a sharp restriction on uranium enrichment activity, as well as dismantling of nuclear facilities, alongside tight international inspections and monitoring.
I think the aim is, first and foremost, to create a workable framework to make the talks run as smoothly as possible, but it's impossible for me to say now, at this point, what the result will be at the end of this particular round, I'm afraid.
Iran, who insists its nuclear work is solely peaceful and rejects the Western allegations that it is seeking a nuclear weapon, has vowed never to shut down its nuclear facilities.
To us, what has been announced as dismantling Iran's nuclear program and facilities is not on the agenda.
The Vienna talks will be the first in what is expected to be a series of tricky encounters in the coming months. The November Geneva interim deal was widely praised as a diplomatic breakthrough, but it postponed the discussions on the truly difficult issues. Despite low expectations from both sides, the West regards these talks as the best chance the world has had in a decade to resolve concerns about Iran's nuclear program. A failure will present difficult choices for both sides.
And joining me right now in the studio is Iranian politics analyst Meir Javedan Far. Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you very much for coming again to our studio. So everybody's smiling. Everybody looks very, let's say, happy. But are the Iranians playing any game?
Already they seemed a little bit too enthusiastic when Mr. Zarif was saying we can reach a deal within 6 months. They looked almost under pressure. But now Ayatollah Khamenei is trying to actually strengthen Iran's hands by saying, well, actually, I don't think the talks are going to get anywhere. In other words, if they get nowhere, I'm not worried. This is kind of like one-on-one negotiations. And I think the Supreme Leader is worried about that, which is why we heard him today say, I don't think they're going to get anywhere. I think, as a matter of fact, they wanted to get somewhere because Iran's economy can't sustain the pressure. For now, I think the Iranians are playing up to their responsibilities. What will happen next year or so, this is the most difficult part.
What are they trying to delay?
I think the Iranians are trying to get their way. To keep the centrifuges at 20,000, that's not going to happen. We're talking about 2,000, about 10%. And that's about 90% loss for the Iranians. But what's another sticking point, which is very interesting, is that the Iranians say any final deal reached will be valid only for 5 years. After 5 years, we can go back to everything that we're doing now.
So it's the perfect situation for Iran.
Well, actually, that's not going to. Well, what the EU is saying, what the EU 3+3 is saying, or P5+1, is that first of all, it's 25 years, not 5 years. Second of all, you're going to have to close down Fordo, and you're going to have to reconfigure Iraq. And also the numbers of centrifuges. Look, it's Iran. Iran is not in the driving seat right now. We can't blame them for demanding. Each side demands something, but they're not in the driving seat. They are going to try their best to get the maximum that they can get from these talks.
Before I'm asking you how long can Iran continue with this game, I want to add to this conversation. Joining me right now from Vienna, where the talks are underway, is Laura Rosen, foreign policy reporter for Al Monitor. Good evening.
Thank you.
So, Laura, you've covered the initial nuclear talks before. Does anything seem different so far?
No, I mean, this is the first political level talks that have occurred since they got the Geneva deal back in November. So it's the first time in 3 years of going to these talks, 10 rounds, that Iran is no longer enriching uranium to 20%. So, there is a little bit more confidence. These people at the table were able to reach a deal together, an interim deal, just a couple months ago, and see it go into effect. And we're, in Vienna, where the IAEA is based. The IAEA has confirmed to the parties that they're now getting daily access to Iran's enrichment facilities for the first time, and numerous other measures. So I would say the atmosphere is calm and positive, albeit there's an expectation that these comprehensive deal talks are going to take a bit of time.
But Laura, are the Iranians actually cooperating?
Cooperating in these talks?
Yes, because it seems that they're sending two different messages.
Say again?
I'm saying that it seems that they're sending two different messages.
I don't think that's correct. I'm not sure that what they're trying to signal their going-in position. It's actually not inconsistent with what the six powers have already heard as they were negotiating last fall. And I think there's actually a way around it. And if you listen closely to what U.S. and other officials are saying, you can see how those issues could be bridged. For instance, Iran says, we don't want to close facilities. And what you hear the U.S. saying is convert facilities that, obviously, a main one being the Iraq heavy water reactor. So, the U.S. would like them to convert that to a light water reactor. And Iran has said, well, we might be willing to do some conversion, but they haven't said exactly what they would convert it to. So, but, this is just the going in and structuring how they're going to negotiate these next few months. This is not when they're sitting down, going over each substantive detail right now.
Yes, Laura Rosen, thank you very much for this. Meir?
Well, actually, I agree with what Laura's saying in terms of the difficult parts that are there. The Iranians, it's very... For the domestic audience in Iran, it's difficult for the Iranian government to say we're actually shutting down Fordo. The shut down because of a pressure that's kind of like going on your knees. That's the way they are portraying it. But unfortunately, the issue here is that as much as they have their own domestic issues, Fordo, the site in the mountain, was legally speaking born out of wedlock. The Iranians did not declare it as they were supposed to declare it in time. They were secretly building it. If you have no intention of making a weapon, why were you building a secret site deep in the mountains? And I think this is a sticking point. If we can reach a deal where everybody's issues and demands are met in the halfway, that's fine. But when you have a site that's deep inside a mountain and you could enrich, I think as long as such a site exists, it's going to be very difficult, especially for the state of Israel, to relax about any final deal with Iran, even one which includes Iran having 2,000 centrifuges.
Yes, very interesting days ahead of us. Meir Javed Anfar, thank you very much for this. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been perhaps the most vocal critique of the Iran talks, expressing continued concern that the regime is simply buying time. Earlier today, on a tour of an Israeli hospital caring for Syrian wounded, Netanyahu made the link between Iran and a brutal Syrian civil war. I-24 News diplomatic correspondent Tal Shalev has the story.
Despite decades of enmity, over the past year, Israel has been quietly aiding hundreds of wounded Syrian civilians in a field hospital in the Golan Heights, regardless of their nationality or loyalty. This was the scene the Israeli Prime Minister chose to emphasize today as he continues his efforts to unveil the true face of Iran against the backdrop of the talks launched between 6 world powers and Iran in Vienna.
Here's the dividing line on the Golan Heights between the good and the bad. The bad is what is happening on the Syrian side of this border, where Syrian civilians, including children, whose screams we're hearing today, are being butchered, are being pummeled, are being hit by the air with terrible bombs by the Assad regime. Who's supplying these bombs? Who's supplying these weapons? Iran. Who's giving the instructions? Iran. Who's giving the backing for this butchery? Iran. That's the bad. Here's the good. It's right near, right next to me. These are the doctors, the nurses, the soldiers of the Israeli Defense Forces that are giving help to these children.
Netanyahu was on a day tour of the Israeli-Syrian border, which has become a focal point of tension in the 3-year-old Syrian civil war. After Defense Minister Moshe Ya'alon and Chief of Staff Benny Gantz briefed him on the situation on the border, including the infiltration of Islamic Jihad elements into Syria, the Prime Minister continued to the unique Israeli hospital, visited the patients, and stressed Iran's role in the ongoing slaughter in the region.
That's what I want to say to the world today when the P5+1 talks are resumed with Iran. Iran hasn't changed its aggression. It hasn't changed its savagery. It hasn't changed its support for the Assad regime while it's butchering its civilians. That's the true face of Iran. We should not forget it.
Just a short while after Netanyahu finished his visit, 2 mortar shells from Syria exploded in the Golan Heights. They caused no injuries or damage, but served as a reminder that the bad that Netanyahu spoke of is far from being over.
U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry will meet with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas in Paris tomorrow as part of the ongoing efforts to convince Israel and the Palestinian Authority to reach a framework agreement, a crucial basis to continue the peace negotiations. Ahead of the meeting, Israeli chief negotiator Tzipi Livni had this to say.
But there is an opportunity now, basically, talking about the United States, we have a game changer here. He has a name. The name is Secretary John Kerry, that decided to be active, not just to give both sides to do no matter what, but to be active also in an understanding that this is not only an American interest, but this is also the interest of the State of Israel.
Yeah, and we're going to Egypt. The Islamist militant group Ansar Bayt al-Maqdis via Twitter is warning tourists to leave Egypt and threaten to attack those who stay after February 20th. Egyptian Prime Minister Hazem el-Belblawi said today that the Islamist militant group aimed to undermine a political roadmap unveiled after an army takeover in July. Attacks by Islamist militants have killed hundreds of policemen and soldiers since then, but the bombing on Sunday marks a strategic shift to soft targets. And right now, joining me in the studio, senior Middle East analyst Ali Waked. Good evening, Ali.
Good evening, Lucy.
You're coming with a lot of news from Egypt.
Yeah, we were told this evening by some important sources in Egypt, including the Egyptian intelligence, that according to the information that they are collecting, some of it as part of the collaboration with the Israeli intelligence, Egypt is going to face a very critical phase in the coming weeks, months. It appears that what happened 3 years ago in Syria, we are seeing the Egyptian edition. We are talking about thousands of jihadists that, according to this information, are preparing to reach the Sinai and the Egyptian territory from Saudi Arabia, from Yemen, from Pakistan, and from elsewhere to come to fight against the regime. We are talking about a growing coordination between the different jihadist Salafist groups that are acting in Egypt. We're talking about...
You're talking about a new, perhaps, civil war that will happen in the Sinai Sinai Peninsula?
We are not talking only about the Sinai Peninsula, Lucy. We are talking about a division of territories between the different jihadi groups of Egypt, from the Delta to Sinai, from the Canal Suez to Cairo and to all the region in Egypt. The jihadist group are decided to prove to the Egyptian regime that they are capable to strike everywhere in Egypt and to destabilize the situation in Egypt. And we are going to see this escalation as the longer we are getting close to the Egyptian presidential election, we are going to see, according to this information, this escalation. The fact that jihadists that received trainings in Syria and elsewhere will come to practice their trainings in Egypt is a critical evolution of the conflict. The fact that these groups are dividing Egypt into territories, and some of them are calling to declare in the peninsula as the beginning an Islamic Emirate, an Islamic independent or autonomous territory, yes, is a crucial and critical development.
What you're saying is very serious, from according to your sources. But can the new regime in Egypt cope with this?
Well, I heard this evening the word Syria 2 in the Egyptian perspective, but I will say that the Egyptian army, although he is in confrontation with some parts of the Egyptian population, is more in the consensus than the Syrian army was. My sources say that they know they are going to face a huge challenge, but they don't believe they will reach a situation in which those jihadist groups will be capable to declare some areas in Sinai or in the Delta or in the Canal as free, liberated region from the power of the army. But this is the equation in the coming weeks and months. According to this information, we are going to see a direct, large confrontation between the jihadist group and the current regime in Egypt.
So we're seeing again the Arab world collapsing in itself.
That's right.
Ali Waqt, thank you very much. Of course, you will keep on updating us on the same subject and more. And we're moving on. Former military ruler Pervez Musharraf has appeared in a Pakistani court for the first time on treason charges after apparent security and health concerns prevented him from attending all earlier hearings. I-24 News reporter Eli Ochenberg has the details on the highly anticipated trial.
Former Pakistani military chief Pervez Musharraf finally arrived at the special court to face treason charges in Islamabad after months of ignoring summons citing security and health concerns.
Today, General Pervez Musharraf, according to the undertaking, appeared from the hospital under compulsion, and the court decided that prior to framing of charge on General Musharraf, they would rather decide the issue of the jurisdiction.
The former president faces the death penalty over his suspension of the constitution and the imposition of emergency rule in 2007 while trying to extend his rule. Musharraf seized power in a military coup in 1999, ousting Nawaz Sharif, who is once again prime minister today. During Musharraf's term in power after the September 11 attacks, he allied with the United States against the Afghan Mujahideen in particular and in the war on terrorism in general. The Bush administration relied heavily on Musharraf to facilitate the 2001 U.S.-led invasion to Afghanistan. Pakistan's withdrawal of support for the Taliban government, which it had helped install, was critical to the Taliban's rapid overthrow. The Musharraf regime also provided supply routes for U.S. forces in Afghanistan and helped track down terrorist targets. Tuesday, more than 600 security personnel were deployed along the route from the military hospital to the court, securing the highly anticipated trial. Around 24 supporters stood outside the gate of the court singing, "Long live Pervez Musharraf." The case is also being closely watched for any impact on the relationship between Pakistan's three power centers, the military, an increasingly assertive judiciary, and the unexperienced civilian government.
Yes, and coming up on this evening edition. Ukraine is in flames once again. At least 7 people dead after violent clashes erupt between opposition protesters and police in central Kiev. And I24 News sits down with the first gay couple recognized by the State of Israel as legal parents through surrogacy without the process of adoption. Don't go anywhere, 2 minutes break, and I'll be back. Welcome back again, and we are opening with Ukraine. At least 7 protesters died today in Kiev during intense clashes with police outside of parliament as its members prepared to vote on reinstating the 2014 constitution. What you're seeing now is live footage from Ukraine. And EU Foreign Policy Chief Catherine Ashton said today she is deeply worried about the grave new escalation in Kiev. And right now, joining me from Kiev is Oleg Rybachuk, former Chief of Staff to President Yushchenko. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining us again.
Yes, can't say good evening because it's nightmare. As we are talking, police is moving, circulating around 20,000 people. There are armed personnel carriers, machine guns, submachine guns. They are throwing fire grenades, water guns, and they are squeezing almost more than 20,000 people right on Independence Square. I am watching live TV right now. I was there. The whole city is paralyzed. They blocked metro, underground is not working. They blocked all the roads around Kyiv. People are not allowed in and out. And we are talking about I don't know how many thousands of heavily armed riot police, and I emphasize again, they are using machine guns, Kalashnikov, and submachine guns. So how many dead people would be there till morning, no one knows.
How come the situation deteriorated today so much?
Well, as you said correctly from the very beginning, there was a chance, and last time when we've been speaking, I said that today there was a chance to reach a political compromise, but government decided not to do so. President Yanukovych does not want to get rid of those powers which he practically used anti-constitutionally. The compromise could be there in parliament, but they refused, pro-government majority refused to adopt any document, and they didn't allow opposition protesters to come closer to parliament. Right near the parliament, riot police is giving place for only pro-government demonstrators. So when opposition demonstrators came there to parliament to urge parliament for voting, clashes happened. It's impossible to say who started first, but we saw police throwing grenades on the heads of the people right from the roofs of the houses nearby. I was today getting some heavily wounded people from there to hospitals. It's nightmares. It's horrible. It's the worst-case scenario we could speak of, and what will be till the morning, no one knows.
You're saying that it's
Yanukovych probably would like to invite opposition leaders later on for talks, but right now the battle goes on, and army versus peaceful protest.
You know, seeing this footage, it's unbelievable that it's escalated, and it's actually what is happening for the last few hours. It's maybe very hard to say, or maybe very hard to ask, but who is the winner and who is the loser right now?
Listen, obviously, if you have heavily armed riot police and army against armless protesters, there are very little chances to withstand military. But politically, this government is dead. They will not be able to stay in power anymore, because even if they would clean Independence Square, the people will never forget that. So I'm pretty positive this is the end for President Yanukovych. He would be internationally isolated. But we may have, I don't know how many people may die for this. This is like, again, Ukraine is fighting for its independence.
Is it a planned act, what we're seeing tonight? Is it something that he anticipated? Obviously, he is sending all these forces to the streets, but did he anticipate this?
Well, they've been keeping extra power always there. But, you know, if you are in charge of the country, if you would like to have a compromise, you must take initiative. If nothing is happened politically, to find compromise in the street is always practically impossible. So government, and specifically President Yanukovych, who has all powers, is stubbornly unwilling to get into serious negotiations. This is only his personal responsibility. And frankly, I don't know what he's thinking about, because in 21st century, there is no place for somebody who is killing his own people bloodily, openly, because right now there are so many international observers. There are diplomats, ambassadors. I was seeing many today. This is all broadcasted live. So you can go into the court with live broadcasts of horrible crimes you did against your own people. I'm talking about President Yanukovych in this case.
Yes, Oleg Rybachuk, thank you very much for this. Of course, we hope that you will have a much more quiet night at the rest of this night. Thank you very much. And we're moving. Fierce clashes also broke out in Bangkok today, the latest flare-up in an ongoing standoff between anti-government protesters and security forces. I-24 News correspondent Charles Biblazer reports.
Chaos returned to Bangkok on Tuesday as gun battles between anti-government protesters and security forces gripped the Thai capital. At least one police officer was killed, along with 3 civilians, and dozens more were injured.
During the clashes, ammunitions were fired from snipers, and M79 grenades were launched.
Violence erupted as an estimated 15,000 officers partook in Operation Peace for Bangkok mission, the government's most determined effort yet to clear demonstrators. The crackdown comes as Thailand's anti-corruption body threatened to indict Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra over a rice subsidy scheme which saw her government assume a $4 billion debt owed to up to 1 million farmers. Shinawatra was quick to deny any wrongdoing.
I express my regret and apologize to the farmers. The farmers are being used by the anti-government movement. They are hostages in what has caused the government's inability to operate accordingly.
The program has fueled anger against Yingluck, and on Monday, tensions boiled over when farmers stormed the ministry building housing the premier's temporary office.
My children are starving to death. You, the government, are lying all along. You keep saying that we will be paid gradually. But when are we going to get that money?
Amidst the political paralysis, Thailand's GDP growth plummeted in the final quarter of 2013, a bad harbinger for a government beset by what is increasingly taking on the form of an economic uprising.
Yes, and now to health. The teen years are a key time for evaluating and protecting mental health. Some 75% of disorders develop before the age of 24. Depression is one of the more common concerns. Now researchers at the University of Cambridge are working on a way to screen for depression in boys, just like screening for heart problems. Yes, and joining me right now from UK is one of the researchers of the study at the Cambridge Centre for Brain Repair, Professor Joe Herbert. Thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure to be here.
So, Professor, how can this tool predict the risk of depression?
It's a combination of measures. What this represents really is the development of psychiatry from a purely based on the history or the story the patient gives you, the symptoms, to a clinical science which is like other branches of clinical science based upon investigation, tests. And this particular test is a combination of 2 things. It's a combination of measuring mild depressive symptoms and the high level of cortisol. And we find that if we do this in adolescent boys, we can predict to a high degree whether they will develop depression over the next 2 years. And that's very important because then you can do 2 things. Either you can make sure they get adequate medical supervision in time, and also, of course, you might have the opportunity to prevent the onset of this very serious illness.
So, Professor, why is it important to do early in the teen years specifically?
Yes, very important. Something between a half and 3/4 of all mental illness starts in the adolescent years. And if you can get them then you may prevent a long history of subsequent mental illness throughout life. Many people who apparently have the onset of a serious mental illness in adult life, in fact, have started it in adolescence. So if you can detect it then, and a large number of young people go undetected, that's the important point here, then doctors have an opportunity for keeping these people under surveillance and indeed initiating treatment in the early stage before it does very severe damage to their family life, educational life, their personal life, and their prospects in life.
Yes, of course. Professor Joe Herbert, thank you very much for this conversation with us.
Delighted to be here. Thank you.
Yes, and Ugandan officials have confirmed that the country will push forward with a controversial new law that not only criminalizes homosexuality, but goes so far as to prevent its public defense. I-24 News correspondent Charles Biblizer has more.
We shall have a war with the homosexual lobby in the world, but backed by these people, and you. We go back to work.
And so it is that in the face of widespread international criticism, Uganda's president will sign into law a bill outlawing homosexuality.
Our bill says, please, if you're homosexual, stay indoors. Anybody found committing this incredible and abominable act should be checked and isolated from society.
Confirmation of the decision comes after Uganda conducted a, quote, scientific analysis meant to study homosexuality and genetics in human beings. And while rights groups accuse Museveni of discrimination, his government thinks otherwise.
The Pope says, we should be tolerant and forbearant. Of course we have said we are tolerant. That's what we're saying. We are not slaughtering them.
On Sunday, U.S. President Barack Obama weighed in, expressing disappointment with America's close ally.
We believe that people everywhere should be treated equally, with dignity and respect, and that they should have the opportunity to reach their fullest potential, no matter who they are or whom they love.
The Ugandan anti-gay bill cruised through Parliament in December after its architects agreed to drop a death penalty clause. The bill still stipulates that repeat homosexuals be jailed for life, outlaws the promotion of homosexuality, and requires people to denounce gays.
Already we had seen the number of increase in terms of threats and arrests in the community. People were even being followed and being picked out of their houses.
Homosexuality is illegal in 37 African countries, and few Africans are openly gay, fearing loss of their jobs, imprisonment, and violence.
They are a doctor and a lawyer. They have 3 beautiful children and 2 adorable dogs. They seem like the perfect loving family, and they are both called father. I-24 News correspondent Roni Ben-Bassat met with Alon and Ilan Tabak Aviram, the first gay couple to be recognized by the State of Israel. Let's hear their story.
Alon and Ilan Tabak Aviram and their kids make the perfect example for the new family cell, an increasingly growing concept not only in Israel but worldwide. They fought for years to bring their first child, Ella, into the world through a surrogacy process in the United States. But once they brought her back home to Israel, a new struggle emerged. Although they are both listed as fathers in their daughter's U.S. birth certificate, when they asked to be registered as their legal parents in Israel, the clerk wouldn't recognize Ilan, the non-biological parent, as the child's father.
I felt like I was excluded by the government, by my own country, from being a parent after having been through such a long and complicated and full of disappointment process.
According to Israeli law, the couple had to provide a DNA sample, proving one of them was the biological parent. The non-biological caregiver was required to adopt his own child.
We knew that this is our country,
If we don't fight the battle here, then the battle will be lost, and we need to fight it for others.
The couple decided to take their fight a step forward and filed a petition to Israel's Supreme Court of Justice.
It took us almost 2 years, where the state had filed all these petitions and all these claims, but at the end of the day, justice was done, and by a majority of 5-2. We won the case.
The couple's brave move will help in paving the way for other Israeli parents who choose surrogacy, one of the only options for gay male couples to bring children into the world.
We live in a society and a culture, the Jewish culture, that really encourages people to have children. For gay couples, up to recently, it was not really an issue. It was not expected from gay couples to have kids. I think that there's a recent change in this attitude.
With the option of grandchildren back on the table, it may become easier for younger gay individuals to come out to their parents. And little by little, it is groundbreaking changes like this in Israel's legal landscape that enable more new families to emerge and come out into the open.
We wanted our story to be heard. We wanted people to understand that you can fight and win at the end.
Yes. These are the kind of pieces that you do at the end of the piece. And shifting now to culture, with me now on set is Leticia Loreni. Hello.
Hello.
So I will give you the stage because you're going not to talk about Superman, not about Spider-Man, not about Iron Man, about
the Ant-Man.
Ant-Man. So, what is this?
So it's not a superhero that actually carries bread on his shoulder to save the world from hungriness, from a hunger. It's actually so it's an ant. It's a new Marvel character. Like every Marvel superhero, he has a regular identity. He's Dr. Henry Hank Pym, yet another scientist turned superhero whose intelligence makes Einstein look rather ordinary by comparison. Pym specialized in the fields of robotics and biochemistry, and invented the Pym particles that's allowing him to shrink or grow his body at will, so he can sneak around and detect it because he's like an ant.
How come we didn't hear about Ant-Man?
Actually, the Ant-Man, the problem with this character is that when Marvel created this character, it was actually very fun. It was during the Cold War, not that fun, but paradoxically, like yes. It became a fun character fighting against villains, and then he became one of the first characters to go with the Avengers that you don't know about, but he was one of the first Avengers, and so the Marvel creators started to think, okay, let's add some personality to this character, more layers of personality, and they made him tragical, actually almost like he has a mental illness. So it was way less attractive for Hollywood studios to do a movie about him.
I have a person, maybe a Hollywood star, who can do the character.
Well, there is Paul Rudd that actually
I thought about George Clooney.
George Clooney wearing a little hat with antennas.
Yes. Leticia, thank you very much for this.
Thank you, Lucy.
And we're going out for a small break, 2 minutes break, and then we will be back with the I-24 News Daily Debate. Don't go anywhere.